everyone, this is Jane with Barlow Herbal, and happy Sunday, January 4th of 2026. Here we go into a brilliant new year. I hope you had a wonderful wrap up of 2025 and a brilliant couple of days into this brand new year. Now, the word that kept coming into me as we move into this new year, and as I was writing in my journal, is the word integration. And I think with all of the things that we have been through, not just this past year, this was an accelerated year for sure. But I had some really beautiful thoughts come in. And the word that really kept sticking into my journaling thoughts all week was this word integration. So how do we take all the lessons, all of the things we've learned, and integrate it? It's just like having a powerful plant medicine journey. You have to go in with intention. You have to have it facilitated well as you can, and then there's integration. So when you have something that happens that's big, that's life-changing, and for many of us, this past year 2025 provided that. It provided stripping away of old things, releasing old situations and relationships and whatever. And now this is the year of integration. So I have some really beautiful journaling thoughts that I'm excited to share with you. So what I wrote is this: it feels like 2025 stripped away anything that was illusionary. So the illusions stripped away, and what it demands of us is integration. So it doesn't demand hope or optimism, but what it is asking of us is to embody the things that we've learned. And as a person who, I've shared this with you before, I've had a small handful of very carefully facilitated plant medicine journeys. The integration piece is very critical, and it's important, and it's not like it is. I mean, it's just important, especially if you go into something like that with deep intention. So to me, this is now we get to embody, we get to integrate and embody it. Okay, so this is what I think this showed us. We showed us that the truth we can no longer unsee certain truths, and this is what I wrote: in systems, relationships, our identity, which includes our work, the limits, the power, and the time. Okay, all of these, we can no longer unsee. These things that we see, we can no longer unsee them. Okay, so this is the year we get to ask ourselves, or last year was the year that we asked ourselves, what isn't real? And if you think about the awakening journey that many people have been on, just because you're awake and aware doesn't mean you're done. Okay, that now it's the action time. Okay, so last year asked of us, what isn't real? Like if you've been on like a fast track to awakening, where you go, where's the truth? Because every single system and almost every single situation, the media, everything, you realize there's layers and layers and layers of lies and programming. So last year ask of us, what isn't real? Okay, now this is the question that 2026 will ask of us. Now that we know, and now that you know, how will you live? Okay, so this is the question I ask myself, which is something harder. This is something harder than what isn't real. Now that you know, how will you live? Okay, so this is where I feel like, with the awareness and with a lot of things that have been exposed and the truths that we now know, how do we integrate this? Because it's not just, oh, I'm aware, I'm going to keep doing what I do. I'm aware, but now you get to put into action and integrate what you know. Okay, so this is what I think that 2026 demands of us: pure coherence. Okay, what do we believe? What do we say? And what do we do? So those three things: what do you believe? What do you say? And what do you do? Okay. So I think that here's what I wrote: 2026 is going to, it exposes all of this misalignment very quickly. So whenever you see something that's misaligned, you no longer question it, and you don't even bring it into your awareness, or you don't even allow it to settle into your life, even on a slight level. Okay, because it's now in misalignment, right? Okay, and this is what I wrote: things don't kind of work anymore. So things don't kind of work anymore. They either fit or they don't. Something either fits or it doesn't. Okay, So this is what I feel like this is what this coherence does. This is where most people break. And that might sound kind of harsh, but what this means is this. Coherence means that our life stops lying for us, like lying, telling a lie. When we are in coherence, our life stops lying to us. Okay, so this is what I think 2020 did for us. It showed us that there were contradictions. Saying you value peace, but you choose chaos. Okay, that's a contradiction. This is what 2025 showed us. Saying that you want depth, but then you're living on dopamine. You say you want depth, but then you just keep scrolling. You keep tuning into Netflix. You keep numbing yourself out with substances, whether that be food, alcohol, whatever that is. Okay, saying that you're working on yourself while avoiding it. Okay. And then, well, here's what I wrote. Saying that you're working on yourself while avoiding the same hard conversations or the effort, the work, or the actions. Okay. I'm working on myself, but that doesn't mean anything if you just say the words. Okay. So if, think about this. This actually made me, I was in the fitness industry for 22 years before I am in the herbal business. But when I was in the fitness industry, I not only worked in gyms, I helped open a few gyms in California, and then I built my own gym in Salt Lake, and then I worked for another large chain as a manager in Salt Lake before I'm doing what I'm doing now. So every January, everyone went to the gym. Everyone had their New Year's resolutions, and January was the busiest month. And I'm sure this is still the case, but then the actions show differently. Okay. So let me say this part again. So 2025 showed us these contradictions that you say you value peace, but you choose chaos. You say you want depth, but you live on dopamine. Okay. That's easy. It's just so easy to do that. You say that you are working on yourself while avoiding the same hard conversations or the effort or the work or the actions. Okay. So this is what I think is going to happen in 2026. These contradictions will stop being tolerable. You won't be able to tolerate this anymore. Okay. And what this looks like in real life is this. Okay. I feel like my body reacts really fast when something's off. So I said my body reacts faster when something's off. So I get fatigue, anxiety, or irritation faster than I ever have. And so I can immediately go, this isn't working. I can remove myself. Relationships that ran on ambiguity, okay, so just ambiguous, they either collapse or they force you to have clarity. All right. This is what this looks like in real life as we move into 2026. Work that doesn't match your values drains you twice as fast. And this is something we talked about pretty heavily last week, where you might have found yourself in a position where it now misaligns with your values, like a work position or something that you're doing to earn a living, and it pays you really well, but it no longer aligns with the things that you know. And then this is where it gets really tricky. And everybody's journey through this is very individual. So work that doesn't match your values drains you twice as fast. So if you are in a position, or someone you love is in a position where you need to be doing this to pay the bills, and this is what you do, and maybe it's something that you can't as easily get out of, or whatever, because every situation is different, then this is where you start to recognize, okay, this is what's happening. This is why it drains me twice as fast. And then make the steps to rejuvenate and regenerate and take care of not just your physical self, but your emotional self, right? Okay, so to me, there's no later button. So I'll do this later. Like, to me, those days, honestly, if we're going to be in integration and coherence, I'll do that later, the later button. Those days are over. They feel over to me. Okay. If you really want to be on this higher timeline. Okay. So I think that when you're misaligned, it has immediate consequences. This is what it feels like for me. Okay. So this is the thing about coherence. It's not dramatic. Okay. It's actually brutal because it's boring. Okay. When you are in coherence, when you're still learning this, when you're still getting used to the stillness, it can be brutal because it's boring, because we're so used to the constant dopamine hit. So here's what I wrote about that. It's brutal because it's boring. And this is what you'll find. Like for me, I don't want to return texts anymore that I don't want to answer. You know, in fact, I know people who will blast out a text every Thanksgiving or every Christmas or every New Year. Those are probably the three most common. And it'll just be a copy and paste into their whole, all my family, all my friends, and they'll just change the name. And it really doesn't, there's no connection there. And so you're just doing something that's not in coherence with how you want to live your life anymore. Okay. So returning texts that I don't want to answer. And then leaving situations that I keep justifying. That is dialed in for me. But I feel like a lot of people, if you can realize this is just a choice. You can stay in a situation no matter what it is, or you don't have to justify staying in a situation. Now, there are nuances around all that, because if you think about it, we have family situations, we have obligations, but we can navigate that. We can navigate that with love and with kindness and with what works for us still. Okay. And then this one, doing the unsexy thing because it's the true one. It's and I mean unsexy just because you look at all of the things that are out there, and that's just a phrase. You do something that's not as polished and as perfect and as sexy, and I don't mean that in, I mean that in just, it's something it's not all shiny and pretty. It's just true. You do things because they're true. Okay. And then I love this. Okay. You don't get credit for knowing anyone, you don't get credit for knowing anymore. Okay. Only for living it. Okay. Anyone can know, but you don't get credit for that anymore. In real terms, you only get credit for living it. And living it is quiet, and it's not flashy, and it's not looking for accolades. And this is where you get to really put into practice your knowing, right? And then I think that this is really important, because I talked a lot last week about responsibility and how it equals freedom. And to me, we need to have responsibility without the self-punishment. Okay. So here's what I wrote about that. We're accountable to ourselves, but we're not beating ourselves up. We're not cruel to ourselves. Okay. Think about that. Okay. We're accountable, but we're not beating ourselves up. Like, that can be such a common thing. And to me, those days are over. If you're in this awake awareness and you're really putting it into practice, you take responsibility without beating yourself up. Okay, no more blaming the circumstance. Okay, that's part of it. Okay, no more performing victimhood, because victimhood is a performance. Because it becomes your identity. It gets you out of doing the hard work. It gets you out of doing the self-reflection, doing the shadow work, all the things you need to do to heal trauma, and taking responsibility. Like, when you take yourself out of victimhood, you are taking full responsibility, and that is such a beautiful place to be. And then there's no more hiding behind the process. Okay, you can do the process and do the process and do the process ad nauseum to the end of your days. When do you arrive? And I think the arrival happens now, in the moment. And when you get that clarity of responsibility, everything changes. Okay, so here's what I wrote. I get to choose repeatedly and quietly, and that's the work. I don't have to spread it out and tell everybody what I'm doing. I can do it responsibly. I can do it repeatedly. I can do it quietly. And that's where the work is. No one needs to know what my journey's doing. And I know I'm not talking about like getting support and sharing with someone who maybe can give you that support, or whatever it is that you need to do. I'm not talking about that kind of stuff. I'm talking about once you know and you're aware and you've been doing the process, it's like, when do you land? When do you land in that? Okay. So most people confuse responsibility with, and what I wrote here is self-flagellation. We think we have to beat ourselves up, okay? And here's what I think 2026 rejects this. It rejects the excuses and the self-hatred. No more excuses and no more self-hatred. Like, when do we get to start just loving ourselves with all of our flaws and all the things we're working on and all of the imperfections? And, we need to stop beating ourselves up, truly. Okay, both of these, what I feel like, they're just avoiding. Okay, both are avoiding. So this is what responsibility in 2026 looks like for me. And it sounds like, okay, this is my pattern. I didn't choose its origin, but I choose whether it continues. Okay, so this is a pattern I have. Okay, and imagine saying this to yourself about whatever it is. Okay, this is my pattern. I did not choose its origin. I choose whether it continues. That is a powerful statement. And then this, I didn't cause this outcome alone. Whatever outcome it is, whatever situation, whatever relationship, whatever, I did not cause this outcome alone, but I participated. This is taking ownership and responsibility so that you can change it, so you can flip it. You can flip the script, right? And then this is something that I've been talking about for a long, long time. No one is coming. And you can add on there, no one is coming to save me. No one is coming to save us. But no one is coming. And this is not tragic. This is not sad. This is not tragic. It's clarifying. It just clarifies. It clarifies the situation. And how empowering is that? Okay. And this is where I think where this lands. We stop narrating our pain for sympathy. We stop saying, I'm narrating my pain over and over and over again because I get the sympathy. And it's a feedback loop that you just get used to. And it becomes your identity. Okay. And you get to stop doing this, not just internally, but externally. So don't not only stop the loop to yourself, but stop the loop to others. And it might be easier to stop the external first, or maybe internal first. This would probably be a lot more powerful to stop that internal. Okay. But here's where I think this is the hard part. Okay. You don't get to punish yourself. Let's see, how did I write this? You don't get to punish yourself instead of changing. Okay. So we can punish ourselves as much as we want, but that doesn't change anything. Like, what's required right now is change. And like I said, it's not loud. The work is that it's quiet and it's repeated. It's repeated over and over and over. Okay. If we keep replaying guilt without altering our behavior, what's happening there is, I wrote here, is we're not accountable, we're stuck. Okay, when we keep replaying over and over and over, I, as a mother of adult children and with a friendship base of people that have adult children, there are some of them who still beat themselves up for things that they wish they'd done better as a parent when they were raising their kids. Okay, that's just a loop of guilt, and it doesn't do anyone any good. So let me say that again. If you keep replaying guilt without altering behavior, you're not accountable, you're stuck. Okay. And so I'm not talking about maybe forgiving yourself for the past. And, no one's a perfect parent. That's like, that's not part of the deal. When you come here as a human being and you choose to have a family, this is why we turn to the older people and the elders and the grandparents and the aunts and the uncles as part of our community, because they have the wisdom. And not all of them have the wisdom and the right wisdom for us. This is where we get to use discernment. But we don't have to continually beat ourselves up, right? So here's what we demand. Here's what 2026 demands of us. This is a beautiful thing that came in. Clean ownership. Just clean ownership. Okay. And then I wrote this. Name the choice, feel the consequence, and then adjust the behavior. Okay, so 3 things. Name the choice. What are you choosing? Okay, feel the consequence of what you chose, whether that's good, bad, indifferent, whatever, and then adjust your behavior accordingly. Those 3 things. Okay, that is clean ownership. I love that. And then this, move on. No melodrama. Don't You don't need to have the melodrama about it. You don't need to tell everyone. You don't need to post it on social media. I mean, you certainly can if you've got a platform and you want to share what you do to help other people. I'm not talking about that kind of stuff. But move on. No melodrama. Move on to the next one. There's always going to be more choices, more consequences, and more adjusting of your behavior. Like, powerful, right? And then we need to realize that we need to have discernment over reaction. Okay? Oh, that one is good. Okay? So the noise is never going to stop. That's what I wrote. But the way we choose to participate in it can stop. Okay? The noise of this world and all the stuff that's happening is not going to stop. The noise is not going to stop. How we choose to participate is something that we can control. Okay? We can have fewer opinions, but more clarity. We can have less speed, but more precision. This one I love because I think we react so quick. Remember, discernment over reaction. Okay? Less spectacle and more substance. So that I would rather have something that with deep substance, even shallow substance, than just spectacle. I would rather have substance. Okay? So this is what I think is going to happen in 2026 is that it's going to reward those people who know how to pause. If you know how to pause rather than react to whatever is happening, whatever you see, whatever you read, whatever, this is 2026 is going to be a year where this is going to be a superpower, the ability to pause and discern before you react, right? That's my perspective. Okay, so this is what I think happened to our nervous systems in 2025. It overwhelmed everyone. And then this is what I think 2026, what will happen is people will be punished if they stay reactive. And I wrote that just thinking, okay, we were overwhelmed as a collective humanity in 2025. And I felt that too. And I was grateful that I had some habits and some long-standing self-improvement that I'd been doing for most of my adult life. It made me grateful for the parents I had. It made me grateful for my community. 2025, and it's not like it all of a sudden everything shifts because it's now a new year, right? In this construct we call Earth and the Matrix and everything, right? But I think that 2025 overwhelmed everyone, and that I think 2026 is going to actually be a form of punishment for people who stay reactive instead of pause and use discernment. Okay, so let me show you let me expand on that just a tiny bit. Okay, so here's a bit of a reality check. Okay, when you scroll and you keep scrolling, and say you find something that makes you a little angry because they've been lying to us about the food system, they've been lying to us about this, and you land on something and you start scrolling. Because it's going to keep showing you more of the same stuff because that's how the algorithm works. Okay, so a reality check is this: when you scroll like that, that is not awareness. That's not awareness. Okay, and then this: having an opinion on everything is not intelligence. If you have an opinion about everything that you scroll and everything that you look at and everything you watch, that is not intelligence. That's kind of a reality check, right? And maybe you disagree with me. And there might be some intelligence woven in there. Let's put that there. Okay? And then this. To me, this has landed in me so beautifully that this is a reality check. Constant urgency isn't importance. It's poor regulation. Okay? When we're in constant urgency, that's just you are dysregulating everything about your experience here. Not just your nervous system, your biology, your emotions, your spirituality, your situations, your family, your work. When you are in constant urgency, you are in complete dysregulation. And to me, that's a reality check. So I think this is what I think this year, okay? It costs us more when we react more than wait, when we speak more than listen, and speed creates errors that we don't have time to clean up. So when you pause and you don't have just a quick reaction, I mean, think about how many times have you simply written an email or typed a comment on a social media page that was angry, you were upset, you were having a reaction to something. And sometimes you can go in and delete it. But if you send an email and it's I mean, I've done this over the years where now I have much more discernment and I'm so much more careful. But it's like, so speed creates errors that you don't have time to clean up. Because there might be things that you're doing so fast and you're reacting to so fast, you just don't have time to clean them up. Okay, so when you use discernment, this is what this means. We get to choose what and who deserves our energy. Okay, we know when silence is strategic and not passive. Okay, because you don't want to just go, okay, I'm gonna be quiet here because, you know, use your silence as a strategy, and know the difference between that and being passive. There's a difference. This is where discernment comes in. And then let some of the really urgent things, like the fires that you have to be putting out, okay, let them burn without you. Think about that. Wow. Could you do that? You know, we think that the world's going to collapse if we don't do certain things. And you start to learn pretty quickly that the world goes on. The situations in your life go on. And I think this is where 2026 is going to really bring in beautiful discernment for those of us who see it this way. Okay, we don't need to respond to every message, everything that provokes us, or every opportunity. You know, and again, this is where it's a perfect opportunity for me to bring up my nephew's book, you know, The Science of Scaling. I talked about it last week, and how you can apply this to the science of scaling joy, or the science of scaling anything, if you think about it. And what you do is you raise your floor. And I only bring this up because we don't need to respond to every single opportunity, because sometimes you get the most out of life by saying no to things. So it might, you know, sometimes you should be doing, you know, if you're doing 50 things in your business or in your home or whatever, or maybe in your home is not the right, but maybe. But it's usually about this, the success comes from the things that you don't do. Okay, so that's a whole big topic. Okay, so here's what I wrote. I find if I don't pause, I'm not free. If I don't pause, if I can't pause, I'm not really free. That to me is powerful. What I think is going to happen is this: 2026 is going to favor people who can sit with discomfort long enough to choose wisely. Okay, let me read that again. 2026 will favor people who can sit with discomfort long enough to choose wisely. Wow. All right. That is like super powerful. All right. I love this. To me, this feels like a beautiful way to flow into 2026. Okay. So I think, well, let's see. Let me skip through some of this because I think I could probably go on for a while. I think that, well, okay, so 2025 tore down the things that really had no structure to them or no depth to them, things that were kind of hollow, right? So 2026 asks us to construct something that can hold weight, things that are more solid. And you think about all the things that are happening with AI, where you get a painting done with AI and there's no lines that are off, there's no imperfections. Okay, so this is how I would equate this to construct something that can hold weight. So here's where I would relate this to relationships, but with boundaries. So relationships that have boundaries, work with integrity, and identity without the performance. You know, I actually have talked about this the last few months as far as identity without performance, just authenticity. Okay, this year is not going to. This year, 2026, I don't think we're going to be clapping for destruction, like things that are being destroyed, because destruction happens quickly. Okay, what I think is going to happen is it's going to measure the things that last. And if you think about how long it takes to build something beautiful, but then how fast it is, how fast we can destroy things. So we're in a time of building things that last, that are beautiful, not things that are hollow, right? So building, not burning. Okay, so destruction is no longer impressive. It's no longer impressive to destroy. That's not impressive to me anymore. Okay? Burning things down felt righteous in 2025. And it even felt necessary, right? Okay? But destruction is easy. And construction, what that does, that exposes, I think it exposes weakness. Okay? So I think this year we need to tear things apart without replacing them. Let's see, how did I write this? So tearing things apart without replacing them becomes avoidance. Okay, so think about that. If you're tearing something down without replacing it with something that's stronger, more resilient, more beautiful. Okay, so if you're just tearing something down and you're not replacing it, that's just avoiding. That's just avoidance. Okay, and then this, I'm just being honest, stops excusing damage. I'm just being honest, stops excusing damage. And then critique without contribution, it rings like totally inauthentic. So think about that. I'm going to criticize this and I'm going to criticize that. Okay? And I'm not going to contribute anything. I'm just going to criticize. All right? That's just hollowness. You can't critique something without contributing. That's my opinion. That's my perspective. So when you build, it means this: staying when it's imperfect but workable. Okay? So you stay, even if it's imperfect, but it's workable. You repair instead of disappear. Okay? Commit to something long enough to see where your own limitations are. This is really, I think, important in these times that we're in, is to stay long enough to see where our own limitations are. This is where the pausing, the discernment, the responsibility, all of these things kind of flow in together. So this applies in everything. It applies in our relationships, in our work, and our self-discipline, our self-responsibility, all of the stuff, okay? We'll be tempted to leave the moment it gets slow, hard, or unglamorous. Think about that. We move on to the next thing so fast. It's slow. It's unglamorous. It's boring. Okay? But this is the test. That's the test. And this is what I think 2026 asks of us. Can you sustain, not just disrupt? Can you sustain, this is where these beautiful, beautiful traits of humanity come in that I feel like have just been lost with all of the disruptions and all of the technology and all of the stuff. So, to me, that's actually something that's really powerful to think about. Okay, so here I'm going to end this. I've got some really great questions. These are not easy questions. These are actually some really tough questions. Now, I think that this is the biggest question of moving out of 2025 and into 2026. Will you act like someone who knows the truth? No fireworks if you don't, no catastrophe, no fireworks if you do, and no catastrophe if you don't. So if you act like someone who knows the truth, there's not going to be fireworks. It's going to be quiet. And that's okay. It's actually preferable. Okay? And then there's no catastrophe if you don't. But you know when you operate from a place of truth. So what's going to happen is just alignment. You either get alignment, or you could look at it this way. You would just quietly, it would seem like a quiet decay, right? Which I think a lot of people, maybe they choose that unconsciously, right? So will you act like someone who knows the truth? That's probably the hardest question. Okay, so here's some questions I'm just going to go through pretty quickly. Where am I still explaining myself instead of changing my behavior? And who benefits from that lie? If someone judged my values only by my calendar and habits, what would they say I actually believe? That's a big one too. In fact, I think all of these questions are ones that could sit with you for an entire day, each question, and you could really journal on these. They're beautiful. What outcome in my life do I keep blaming on circumstances that I'm actively choosing not to interrupt? Okay, that's the responsibility piece, right? Where am I using guilt, self-criticism, or processing as a substitute for making a clean decision? Just make a clean decision. Okay. What am I reacting to daily that will not matter in a year? And what is that reaction costing me right now? And then this, where would my life improve immediately if I slowed down long enough to choose instead of respond? This is a very powerful question. This question alone, where would my life improve immediately if I slowed down long enough to choose instead of respond or react? Okay, probably react is a better word there. And then this, what do I abandon the moment it requires patience, consistency, or repair? And what does that pattern protect me from facing? Ooh. If I stopped leaving when things got uncomfortable, what part of myself would finally be exposed? We the time of just choosing comfort over everything, I believe those times are over for those of us who really want to put into action this awareness, right? Where am I physically present but mentally elsewhere? And what am I afraid I might feel if I stayed? And then this, what decision would become unavoidable if I removed distraction and sat in stillness for one honest hour? Give yourself an hour to sit with something. What decision would become unavoidable if I removed distraction and sat in stillness for one honest hour? That is a powerful, powerful question. And I think a really, really good one to journal on this week. Maybe sit and journal with all of these. Okay, so here's what I wrote to finish this off. Okay, so this is what I think is, if you want the most leverage, don't answer all of these at once. Okay, just pick one question that makes you defensive or tired just reading it. Okay, so if any of these questions I just asked, pick just one that makes you feel defensive or just tired because you don't want to deal with something, you've been avoiding it. Like that is huge. Okay? And that, what I feel like, pick that one, that's your door. That's your doorway. Okay? So if you want, maybe in the comments, tell me which one hit the hardest for you. I would be really interested to know, okay? And which was one you didn't want to answer. And to me, that's where the real work starts. This is a time to put into action all of the things that we have been made aware of, and start really practicing what we preach, and not do it in a flashy big way. Do it with stillness, do it with love, do it with responsibility, release the victimhood. That this is all really, really, really big stuff. And I think that if you're listening to this and you got to the end of this, you are probably someone who is ready for the next level, the next step, let one of these questions land with you. Maybe take one and journal on it all week long, especially the one where pick something you've been avoiding and give yourself one honest hour. That could be immediately life transformational from my perspective. And let's do a beautiful jump start to this year. So thanks for tuning in today, guys. I hope that you are enjoying the first few days of 2026. This might seem like kind of a big, heavy topic, but I'd love to know what you think about it. So thanks for tuning in today, guys. I love you a ton, and we'll see you next time.